It's time for Shake, Rattle, and Troll, a show for the serious fisherman, as well as the novice looking for tips from the pros. Shake, Rattle, and Troll is brought to you by Bill Luke Dodge Chrysler Jeep. Now, here's your host, saltwater fisherman and tournament pro, Don McDowell.
Good morning. It is Sunday morning, and you have the alternate bass in the box. You do not have Don McDowell. Big Bass Daddy himself is sitting right now somewhere in Missouri. I said it right. And he's enjoying the pleasures of a little bit of turkey hunting. Had a business trip that he had to attend to. And so JK is going to participate for the next 2 hours. And we have what probably I will call the most political show that we've ever been able to do. During this period of time, we're going to be interviewing former Fish and Wildlife Service agent James Beers. Now, Jim Beers had a varied career with Fish and Wildlife, and during his tenure with them, he was part and parcel of the disbursement of funds from the Pittman-Robertson Act monies. And that's the taxes that we, hunters and fishermen and outdoor enthusiasts, pay whenever we are going to be purchasing items. The excise tax that we did, and this went back all the way to the 20s when it was enacted, the purpose of that was that we could fund wildlife organizations, we could fund habitat improvements, and we could basically fund taking care of wildlife. And the purpose behind all of this, of course, is to make sure that the wildlife is regenerated as a consuming public. The hunting and fishing community wanted to make sure that they would always be there. And Mr. Beers, at one point in time, was in charge of watching the disbursements. And if you go onto the internet and you read about Mr. Beers, he had a fascinating career. The most fascinating aspect was when he discovered what he found were unusual circumstances of the spending or lack of spending. The federal government is supposed to collect all this tax money and then redistribute it back to the states. That's the purpose behind it. His sole position at the time was to make sure that the funding was done appropriately. Well, during the late 90s, he found that there were some funds that were, I won't say misappropriated. He will. I won't. Not yet. And he questioned it, and he questioned it heavily. And in the Fish and Wildlife Services division, as he will tell you, he found that there was a massive influx of what I'll call, for lack of a better term, environmental wackos. People who believe that you, me, Bass Daddy, we shouldn't be out there in the woods. We should adore it. We should look at it, but we should never participate with it. We should never consume. And that wildlands are best left wild without any adoptive use by people. So he has agreed to come on the air. We'll see him in the second segment and chat with him about it. But his concern was that somewhere between $45 to $65 million was spent of Pittman-Robertson money for the Endangered Species Act. Now, that to me is a concern. And Patrick, Don's brother Patrick, is sitting here with me. And Patrick, you and I have read the internet. What is your take on Mr. Beers?
I think people are scared of Mr. Beers. I think he knows the truth. He knows where the bodies are hidden, and he speaks freely of it. He knows the truth.
And I think also that the mainstream media studiously avoids him because, as we both know, typical media is left-wing, and they have a reluctance to show anything in the light that would be beneficial for hunters and fishermen to see because they themselves don't like what we do.
No. And the phrase came about last week, guerrilla media. And I believe that we're on the edge of becoming guerrilla media because the mainstream media doesn't care about Pittman-Robertson money. They don't care about wolves. They don't care about what goes on in Washington behind closed doors. And Mr. Beers has been there. He's done that. He's got that T-shirt.
Yeah, the other thing, too, that I found fascinating is that as an employee of the federal government, he was told to stay home for 3 years. And to
while
not
getting
say
paid.
While getting paid.
So he was furloughed.
basically furloughed with one caveat, and that was that he could talk to nobody about Pittman Robinson money. That to me I find absolutely fascinating. And his claim, and I've heard it in a couple of the speeches that he gave, some of the comments that I've read online, and that is that he had been threatened. There were people searching vehicles looking for him on the day he was supposed to report to work, and he didn't on advice from his attorney. They were actually searching vehicles. It's the only time in Fish and Wildlife that they search vehicles looking for somebody. And Mr. Beers was the body that they were looking for. He stayed home that day, and thank God he did, because he probably could have been defamed based on the actions that were going to happen. So he will be our guest at 7:17 this morning. I talked with him this week. He's eager to express his opinions, and I have found him to be a fascinating person. What we are going to do, too, is we're going to take a look. We know that endangered species is here to stay, or at least for a short period of time. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to drive all the way to California, actually the night before, and upon entering the state of California, I noticed that their flag is fairly prominent in a few spots. And if you look at the flag of California, it's the grizzly bear.
Wait a minute, grizzly bear doesn't exist in California.
It does not now. However, there were thousands who roamed the Sierra Nevadas and all up and down the coast of California back prior to the 1900s. And when the gold rushes came and they started moving them out or killing them off, they had that.
Hang on. Why did they start killing them off again?
I don't know. I wasn't there. I know I look like I was there, but I was not there. That's the key. I'm not that old yet. But let's place ourselves right here now. I wonder why a state that has on its logo the grizzly bear, why they don't have a concerted effort to bring them back from this brink of extinction. We know that there are some up in Wyoming, but that's not relevant. This is the state animal. This is on their state flag. Why don't we have a grizzly bear reintroduction through all of California? I suspect that we could probably put in mating pairs up and down all along the coast, and I think that would be appropriate for a state that bears it on its flag.
Well, I think you're right, but JK, there's people that live in California.
Is that relevant?
Well, you have bears and people, and that's not a good mix. I mean, there's a gentleman here that is bear bite number 9.
I understand.
That does not want to be around another bear ever again.
I understand that.
But it wasn't a grizzly bear.
No, grizzly bear would not be a bite. This would be a fatality. And one of the things that I'm finding, the hypocrisy of the Center for Biological Diversity, the Sierra Club, the Defenders of Wildlife is that they're trying to put an apex predator that can move hundreds of miles in a short period of time, which is wolves. And they're putting them into regions where hunting and fishing is it's a way of living. It's a religion. It's in rural communities. And they're putting them in areas where they want to rid the United States of any hunting activity. They want the natural balance. My question then is that we know that in California, why are they not pursuing grizzly bears in California when that's the state animal, it's on their state flag, and there's not one that's living in the state free and clear? It's a hypocrisy, and that's what we're trying to point out.
So what you want to do is bring all the Mexican gray wolves, put them in Phoenix, Scottsdale, Mesa, Tempe, Chandler, Goodyear.
Well, I think that if you talk to the people who are involved, the communities, the rural communities that have Mexican gray wolves currently, they don't want them. They've found out what they do. They've found out how it affects their ranching. The ranching community is the one that's affected the most. That, and of course the fact that I as a hunter who waits once every 9 years to be able to have the opportunity to hunt, I think it's going to keep going up. It's going to be once every 10 years, every 12 years, every 15 years, until we get to the point where it's maybe a once in a lifetime. Now, we also know that if Defenders of Wildlife, Sierra Club, Lobos of the Southwest, and all of these organizations have their way, there would be no hunting. They want to have 3 metapacks in Arizona, southern Utah, southern Colorado, and New Mexico. Their dream is to have the massive reintroduction to bring back from the edge of extinction these...
Whoa.
Yes.
Extinction.
Yes.
That means there is no more.
Correct. There were 7 when we started. There's 75 known now, plus the 190 some I think they have in captivity.
But Canada still has wolves.
Oh, that's not relevant, Patrick.
But you said we were extinct. That means there are no more or very few.
There's very few Mexican gray wolves. And here is the key, that these
But they're still wolves, J.K.
I understand. They want them brought back not only here, they want them universally. I'm fascinated by the logic that goes and the holes in the logic as you progress forward. But they want to recover a single subspecies, which is the Mexican gray wolf, and they want to do it specifically in Arizona, New Mexico, southern Colorado, which represents maybe 10% to 20% of its historic range. The fact that it is called a Mexican gray wolf is for a reason. That's where it originated from, according to theory. That's what we're hearing right now. The theoretical aspects of where their range was. My fascination with the fact is that why would you try and recover a whole species in a small subspecies in a small geographic area when you have a whole country that is reluctant to do so and has shown absolutely no ability to do so. Now, we know that there's been a few transplants of these Mexican gray wolves in Mexico. The life expectancy when they start and they put them in there is probably about 3 months. They have found them poisoned. They have found them shot. We also know that politically, they don't have any scientists who want to go up against the drug cartels in the mountainous regions of Mexico, and that's why they're not doing it. So the hypocrisy is there. In the next segment, we're going to be talking with Mr. Beers. We look forward to it. And this is JK, and
I'm Patrick.
That's what I do, backsliding, hiding. The preacher man says it's the end of time, and the Mississippi River, she's a going dry.
All right, we're coming back in, and we've got 2 editions. One of our guests in studio this morning is Pete Cimolero. Good morning, Pete.
Morning, Johnny.
How are you?
Oh, I'm awake.
Good. I see my wake-up call worked. Also online with us this morning, we have Mr. James Beers. Jim, good morning.
Good morning, John. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I've read, obviously, a bunch of the articles, and we know the results that we've seen over the period of time. The biggest question that I have, and I know that it's most interesting here for us here in Arizona, is we know that there's a massive push to put big numbers of Mexican gray wolves on the ground. They're wanting to change it from the experimental 10J status to endangered species status, and they want them all across the state instead of the limited range that we have now. One of the things that I have said in the past is, and I noted that you said it as well, is that the groundswell of lack of support has to come from those communities that have them and that are most affected. We know the urban people who are, shall we say, Disneyfied, they want to see them all over the place as long as it's not in their backyard. And your express comments have always been that if you start from the groundswell of support and have only the local communities, the counties, those areas most affected, and how they can perhaps prevent the massive inclusion of Mexican gray wolves coming in. And I'm going to let you take over at that.
Well, it's kind of interesting to me that you called me from Arizona to talk about this subject, because Arizona and New Mexico, back in 2004, there was a coalition, it's still there, of Arizona, New Mexico counties, really formed around, between the 2 states and along the border, formed around the concept of what do we, who are putting up with these wolves, what can we do together? So you had this unique in American society today, group of counties from 2 states, acting in one sense like they were not a state, if you will, but a large community that was going to try to solve their own problems because neither of their states would stand up for them.
Correct.
So that put aside now, and we see what's happened with wolves since 2004, when I came down there to get that award and spoke to a bunch of people down there. We see that the wolves have greatly increased in the north and around the Great Lakes, and people are all complaining in the cities, like you say, that they're going to kill the alpha wolves. They go, they can't. This pack is got integrity. They shouldn't be able to trap them. They shouldn't be able to do this to them, and they're taking too many. Blah blah blah. All this stuff, and also the stuff about maybe, which we see more and more each day now. Maybe they shouldn't have cattle out there with the wolves there. Maybe they shouldn't have sheep. Well, maybe they shouldn't own dogs out there. Well, they should learn to keep their kids out there in wolf country. And with that said, we see that Utah and Colorado are still without wolves, and you guys have had them for a while and have been fighting about it, and it's not going too well. So they've got this big push on right now in the north to say, well, we're going to return management of these wolves to the state. Aren't we good people? And aren't you lucky? So the state fish and game departments have got to pick up the costs of not only compensation, but reporting on these wolves, trying to count them, which is all but impossible, and go through court cases and answer all of the complaints from their urban areas and all of this about the wolves. It's an enormous burden on the state with no real return, other than for everybody to say, oh, look, what a good job. The federal government put these things here. It's once again like it was before Columbus arrived, and the state takes care of it. We return management. They've got well, they don't. They don't have management at all. But that said, you've got that big middle area, Colorado and Utah, that they want to get the wolves into so that they can link up with Arizona and New Mexico. And the way you do that is to stuff a lot more in a lot broader area in Arizona and New Mexico. That's what they're up to. Just like they're cooperatively working with Mexico right now to release some wolves in Mexico. Aren't we wonderful? We're going broke up here, and we're sending people down there and money down to Mexico with our folks to put wolves just south of the Big Bend down there, where they're not going to have much food, and the people, despite all of the highfalutin stuff about how the rural Mexicans love wolves, do not love wolves. And the wolves are going to move up into Texas, just like the Arizona-New Mexico wolf movement is intended to move up into Utah and Colorado and sort of take over the whole West as they kind of push into Oregon now and Washington. And they've been showing up, roaming into Northern California. And from all of those states, they're going to tumble out into the Black Hills. They're going to tumble into the Sand Hills, western Kansas, and they're going to learn, just like coyotes did,
how to
live closer and closer to people. This nonsense about, they never lived here, they aren't going to move there, that's crazy. They're just like your dog in your house. They'll do what they got to do as their numbers increase.
Hey, Jim, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
One of the things we know now is that, of course, these are extremely mobile animals that can go hundreds of miles when they face that inclination, whether it's food or searching for a mate. These are extremely mobile animals. When you talked to me the other day, we mentioned the fact that the county governments need to band together very strongly. We have to have a strong county board of supervisors, then we have to have a whole group of counties that agree to it, and from those counties we have to have the state. Now, in 2004, we were under what I believe was the Janet Napolitano regime, who was a strong Democrat, an advocate of shall we say, unsecure borders in Arizona and bringing in all the wildlife, and the environmentalists absolutely adored her. We've got Governor Jan Brewer now, who is staunchly opposed to any more massive reintroductions and who is, quite frankly, a conservative Republican. Do you think we have an opportunity, if we base our strong support and having the rejection of changing it from a 10J status to endangered species?
You bet I do. And the way to do that is not to go to the 10J meetings and follow all of the little nooks and crannies that they keep putting in your way along, because the federal government's working hand in hand with the Humane Society, Center for Biological Diversity, and most of the state fish and game departments, and they're not working in your best interest. And I would take one little exception with one word you use, which we need unified county opposition. I think what you need, what New Mexico needs, and what every state that's facing this issue needs, is authority from the state to recognize county authority or jurisdiction over controlling canids within the county. Now, canids includes coyotes, wolves, dogs, whatever, that are problem animals. And let the voters within the county, whether they all want to do it or a majority want to do it, let them have the authority, if they want to exercise it, of controlling the presence, the behavior, the impacts of wolves within their jurisdiction. I often use the example deer hunting in the state of Virginia, where I lived for quite a few years when I worked in Washington. And the counties are all different. I mean, you look at the deer hunting map there, and it's a riot of colors. And one county allows dogs, another one doesn't. One county allows shotguns with buckshot, another one not. Another one says you can have a 4-week season, another one says a 3-day season. One says you can take a deer a day, the other says only one a year. And all of this stuff. But what it does, once you get familiar with it, it allows the local county or local communities to make decisions about the numbers of deer and the impacts of deer and the way they're hunted within the county. For instance, a county that for years near the Chesapeake Bay might be a very, very thick wooded county, and they've used dogs since the Civil War. And you get a lot of retirees moving in there, and everybody looks around and says, I don't like seeing those dogs run through my yard after these deer, and these guys standing along the road, blah, 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 blah. And then they can get it changed. They can say, well, no longer in our county will we use dogs. The same with rifles.
So they have that ability on a county-by-county basis. Jim, Can you hang on for the next segment? We've got to take a break, pay some of our sponsors, but I want to get into this more.
Well, I've heard my neighbors from all their lives.
Oh, we're back at it. Jim, are you still with us?
Yeah.
All right. One of the things that we have been toying with here in Arizona, and this is a question that you specifically might have a good response to. We know that the animals that we currently have are labeled 10J, non-essential, experimental. And they want a change to basically have anything that gets out of that area become endangered species. Also, they want to have the whole of the state declared as an endangered species. Our thought here, as a rebuttal to that proposition, is to have the whole state declared as a 10J non-essential experimental with a very limited number of the 100 that we agreed to more than 15 years ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you have to do that, simultaneously with looking carefully at the authority that your elected county officials have got in the various counties and the way they word the sheriff's authority and the way that they word our county superintendent or county commissioner's authority. And you've got to establish that they're going to have a say in this legally within the county, within the state. And that the state then does or does not do what you just talked about, making the whole area a 10J area, or simply puts their foot down. And you approach the federal government exactly like they put the wolves in there to begin with raw political power. You're not going to get anywhere with I don't think, now honestly, I'm being very blunt about this, I don't think you're going to get anywhere with playing their games with their wording of, that's essential, but we've got these targets and we've got the area here, and when they get out, we're going to make them endangered over there. And they just keep changing that and sitting down with the academics that they get research from, and those evil, and that's the right word, lobbyists in Washington that want them in there at all costs. You've got to have a strong political opposition to a strong political force. Otherwise, it's just going to continue like it has all over the country, that they just keep rolling over this state, rolling over that state over there, and rolling over the cattlemen, and rolling over the elk hunters and the moose hunters, and lying through their teeth, and the state backing them up, state bureaucrats backing them up. But I think it's essential, I really do, that the state have a strong political base, if you will, to say, look, our elected local officials, our county commissioners and sheriffs in these 8 counties or 18 counties want to control any wolves that are in here, and if you put them in here, they're authorized to do whatever they need to do, just like they do with problem dogs. They're going to pick them up, and you don't get them back, whoever owns them, unless you come in within 3 days to claim them, and then you've got to pay a fine, even if you're a federal government. You've got to pay for their upkeep, and they're going to be marked in such a way that they will be killed the next time they're doing what they were picked up for right now. There's no difference between a wolf in your yard and a little pack of pit bulls out there that you don't know where they came from. They're a danger to people. They're a danger to your animals, your dog, your livestock. They're a danger to game animals. And you're going to say that you're going to kill them the next time that happens, and they're authorized, the counties are authorized to delegate that out. And you're also going to have within your counties the authority for the county commissioners, the sheriff, to say, look, you've got wolves on that property over it, even if it's the federal government's Forest Service property. The only place where they can't do that is Yellowstone. All these other places, the federal government is a landowner just like everybody else. The fact that they've parlayed this business about, well, we don't pay taxes, so we're so special, we're like Ted Turner or something, is nonsense to let them get away with that. If you're going to control wolves and you say, look, we've had problems in this county with wolves in yards and killing cattle, and they're coming out of your place over there, and we want you to control those wolves in there, or we're going to come in and do it for you. And if the person that has that property won't let this county on there, the county just forces their way in, does the control work, just like they would with wild dogs or weeds. The county can go in there and control them and then say, look, we're billing you for it, and if you don't pay it, we're putting a lien on this property. Now, that's the kind of political power that's got to be in place if you're going to stand up to them and say, listen, we're not just out here like a bunch of little baby birds with our mouth open waiting for some federal buzzard to come over and stuff something in it.
You know, that's a good analogy, and I think that if we take a vote, obviously you know that the most liberal areas are always going to be urban dwellers. They have absolutely no concept of what really goes on in the land because they spend their lives sitting in cities. We also know that the Humane Society, the Center for Biological Diversity, and the Sierra Club are extremely wealthy organizations that can paint any picture that they want to that is not based in reality. And they always, their main claim to fame is, quote, one, a healthy ecosystem, and number two, a majority of the public wants to see more wolves. He who phrases the question wins the debate.
Yep.
How do we, I think that from what you're saying, if we say there's 12 counties in Arizona, and out of the 12 counties, Maricopa, as a good example, which is the urban legend here, if Maricopa and, say, Coconino say they want to have wolves, and all the rest of the state says they don't, then we're going to have to transplant them only or have the experimental area in Maricopa County. Does that sound right?
That's correct. When they step into the county where they say, look, we've had a lot of problems here. We don't want any more elk killed and are being killed. We want to protect our cattle. We don't want our kids sitting in cages waiting for school buses. So when we see them doing that, these wolves, we're gonna take measures just like we would with any other wild dog. We're gonna let you shoot coyotes at any time you see them with a problem 24/7. But dogs that are running loose and or wolf-like animals, they get picked up. And if these other counties, that whatever your urban counties are, they can exercise their authority and have wolves there. That's fine. That's like the federal government wants them in Yellowstone, so all the tourists can go out there and whatever.
By the way, you and I talked about this too, and that is that Yellowstone was such a unique population of wildlife, and I've seen documentaries now where they claim that the Yellowstone elk herd is, quote, in a biologically balanced and a more what did they call it? It was a healthy herd now. And my question is, how do you go from in the environmental impact statement, the FEIS, which the federal government, Fish and Wildlife Services, put out, they claim that no less than 5% nor more than 30% of the Yellowstone herd would become food for the gray wolves. We both know that over 80% of that herd has been decimated already, and it's going to go down because those mature animals that have lived are now getting to the point where they're in the non-calving era. They're too old. A lot of those cows are getting way too old.
Those were lies to begin with, and anybody that accepts listening to these lies about, they would have said the same thing if there was only 2 elk left in there. They'd say, oh my gosh, the songbirds have just loved the willows along the streams, and now suddenly there's shade for the trout, and they don't want anybody in there catching those trout. But all of a sudden they're just, we're going to have shade for the trout and all this. It's nonsense. And they would say that stuff and generate whatever kind of propaganda is needed. These people, honest to God, and I guess I'm just a nasty person for saying this, they're no different than a propagandist for the Stalin people or for Hitler or the rest of them. whatever's going on, they're going to spin it so that it makes everybody say, well, gosh, the people in charge are doing the best they can, and this is certainly better than it used to be, isn't it? They're spinning all this stuff, and it's lies. It's just plain lies, and I'm not going to, for a long time, you try to be polite and say, well, they just misinformation. We'll explain it to them, blah, 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 blah. But, I mean, you could look at the collapse of the Lolo elk herd up in Idaho,
yeah,
and you could look at the Yellowstone herd and see what's happened. Just like you can look at Minnesota moose. They just closed the Minnesota moose season, probably forever. For the last 20 years, as the number on the graph of wolves go up and up and up and up, the moose population goes down and down and down. Now we can't even hunt them anymore here, and it used to be a very valuable license once in a lifetime and all this kind of stuff. And they're gone. And the bureaucrats are still getting money here in Minnesota from the federal government and from the state, both of which are broke, to go out there and put tags and collars and satellite monitor and run big articles in the paper. Just read one the other day. Oh, this is because of global warming.
And, that's it. Global warming has taken out the moose.
The moose have got a lot of ticks on them, and there's still a lot more that we got to do research on, because all of the people they hire in the agencies, the federal and state agencies anymore, along with all the other anti-hunting and that kind of stuff, is just in their genes right from the beginning. I guess they're born with it. The idea that, predation is just never that serious, and it's wonderful, and it's natural. That's what went on before Columbus got here. That must be good. And they will never, ever admit to it or look at it honestly. I mean, you look at all these articles and research papers and everything else, and the perspective is there right from the first word. That, of course we all know that, wolves don't do this, or mountain lions don't do that.
We know what they do. James, we've got to take another break. Can you hang on for a portion of one more segment for us?
Sure.
I appreciate it. I'm John Colazar.
Pete Similaro.
Patrick.
All right, we're back. This is John Colazar with Pete Similaro, Patrick McDowell, and former and retired Fish and Wildlife Service personnel, James Beers. James, thank you for taking so much time with us this morning. Pete, you have a question for Jim.
Jim, one of the things I heard you say, and I'm really intrigued by it, is that the county involvement is critical in this. Having the local people that are affected by these wolves have a say in what's done. And to me, that's the missing component in this whole thing, is the fact that you have our urban cities like Tucson and Phoenix dictating to the rest of the state, and of course the environmentalists and the extremists playing to those cities in order to drag them along and create this aura of support for the wolf. Well, it's great to support something when it's in somebody else's backyard. You don't care, really.
Just real quickly, that's exactly how they get them into Washington. Seattle wants them. They get them into Oregon. Portland wants them. They get them into Montana, and Billings and Missoula want them. In Minnesota, the Twin Cities want them. Over in Michigan, it's Grand Rapids that wants them. It's going on all over the country.
Well, for me, that's the very thing that we have to avoid. We have to have our local people involved in this process. And to me, it seems like if we created a 10J state, basically making them non-essential experimental, and then with a component of the counties involved, working with the agencies we have a natural resource council here that's just getting off the ground, and it involves all of our state agencies, and they're working with the counties. This could be a natural place for us to exercise some control and direction for the program that could benefit everybody and keep the wolf numbers in check and management where we can accept it.
I think you're 100% right, but you got to have that local control element put together and working, because if you're just working on the other end of it while you're tinkering with the county end of it, they're going to run over you just like the Germans going into Russia. I mean, just wham, bam, and all of a sudden there you are.
Jim, one of the things I was curious about, and obviously you had to take a 3-year sabbatical. Basically, you were told to stay home, get paid for 3 years, shut your mouth, don't say a word to anybody.
Yeah, that's correct. When all that happened, I mean, a lot of things stunned me. Like the state game and fish directors never asked for the money the millions of dollars stolen from their programs to be replaced.
Were they afraid
Right.
to ask for it back?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they were going to. What are they going to do about future grants for endangered species, or a job that might come available if they want, or an after-retirement position that they can give them to give them a little work to do? And what about Bass Pro picking them up if they were antagonizing all the federal people? Yeah, I mean, you're darn right they were afraid. And their organization was run by a retired chief of the Forest Service, and you don't get to be chief of the Forest Service and that by standing out. And I'm not knocking the guy. Just saying the guys that they put in charge for their influence are the same guys who get where they get in the federal government and other big jobs by getting along with everybody and schmoozing everybody and not ticking anybody off. But the thing that I think I'd like to just mention to your listeners, I was just stunned. After they had sent me home for 10 months, and my lawyer said, look, they want to give you a big cash settlement. I think we got to do this. This is the only way out of this. And I talked to my wife. She said, yeah, we'll do it. I come in to sit down with this, and they offered me 3 large payments of money over and above my salary and my retirement and everything. And they were going to give it to me in 1-year installments. And I had to sign a piece of paper. Now, that money that I was getting was your tax money. That had nothing to do with wildlife or anything else. It was just pure money out of the Treasury. They give it to me in 3 installments saying, and I had to sign a piece of paper, that if I speak or write anything, one word, about the circumstances of my separation from the federal government, I would immediately have to repay all of it. So for 3 years, that was what was in there, I could not say or write a word about this. Now think about this. Aside from me saying, well, that's not right and all this stuff, you guys, I'm talking about elk hunters and fishermen and ranchers and dog owners and the rest of you that might have said, what are they doing in there? What happened to that guy that testified about all that money they stole? They bribed me with your tax money to not say a word to a newspaper, to any interested group, not that they were interested, the Ducks Unlimited, that they all ran for cover, the Cattlemen's Association, the Dog Owners Association, anybody that was interested in, what's the deal here? Did they really steal money? How come the states didn't ask for it back? I never got to answer those questions because they all figured that by 3 years, 3 years later, nobody would remember this. It'd be like, why did we invade Kuwait or something? Like, who cares?
It's not news anymore if it's after the fact so far.
Exactly. But, I mean, I was just absolutely appalled at that. And that's going on right now, I'm sure. We don't want you to say anything. We in the government, come here, we're going to give you all this money, and if you say anything about this for 3 years, oh, Buster, we're going to get you.
Now, that was
it's crazy.
That was back in 98, 99, and 2000,
exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
What are you doing these days?
I write and speak. I go around the country a lot speaking, and I write, and I have a lot of people call me and write me and ask me for help, and I give them all the help I can. And
yeah, Pete and I were up in Springerville in August when you were up there giving your talk. Both of us were in attendance on that, and we also watched. We didn't realize it at the time, but we were part of the David Spady film, "Wolves in Government Clothing." Yep. You watched that, correct?
Yes, I did. He sent me a copy of it here about a week ago, and I watched it and wrote him a real nice little email telling him I thought it was great and thought he did a good job on it. So.
Well, I wish you continued success in what you're doing, James, and obviously I would love to chat with you on a frequent basis as this, and I'll call it what it is. It's a war. We're going to go to war on wolves, and we're going to go to wolves in Arizona. Not only in Arizona, but New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, because I think we're the last bastion that might be able to dig our heels in and say no.
Yep, that's correct.
Jim,
I wish you all the luck in the world.
Jim, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We all do, and thank you so much.
You bet. You have a good day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye. All right, Pete. That was James Beers.
Well, I always appreciate his frankness. In this age of political correctness, when things are often left unsaid or manipulated and said in a different way, I appreciate the fact that Jim called it like he saw it. And we know how big that problem was. We know how that problem still is, how big it is. And I just appreciate the fact that he's out there. People think that he's a radical. Well, I'm a radical right along with him because I fear a government that doesn't tell me the truth and manipulates things behind the scene and works with other organizations clandestinely to shape our future, that's not right. That's not American. That's not the public process.
And part of it too is yes, he accepted staying where he was and not saying a word for 3 years. But if he hadn't accepted that, they would have ruined him. They would have trapped him. They would have made it so that he, who paid all those years, I mean, he was with the Fish and Wildlife Service for over 25 years. He was right at the age of retirement. He would have lost everything. So it wasn't a matter of him just taking extra gain. He would have lost everything if he hadn't bought what they put down on paper for him.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
And it's a sad state of affairs when we find that the infiltration into Fish and Wildlife is more by people who have the disconnect and want to see no human. I remember one of the commissioners who we disagreed with on many occasions, Jennifer Martin, who always said utility fosters use. And that was her big claim to fame. And I'll always remember that from her. And that was basically saying is that if you have the opportunity on the land for people to recreate, whether it be hunting, whether it be horseback riding, whether it be quad riding, in limited sets where everybody can get along, that's the best use of this resource that we have in the United States. And these are public lands that we've paid for forever. What we have now is less than 10% of the population trying to tell all of us that we cannot do what we want to do on land that we've already paid for.
Understood.
So my question is, what do we do now?
I think that Pete and certainly Jim Beers and myself are all on the same page in that, and that is that each of the county governments needs to stand tall. They need to really do that, and I don't care what Maricopa County does, and I don't care what Pima County does. We'll put them in Pima County, right in Congressman Grijalva's backyard, and let him see how he likes having wolves there.
Johnny, one of the things that I think is an important component of all this is the fact we've talked about the state wolf management plan, the fact that the state develops its own, and I know that's in the works. But I think also what I've heard here this morning and what I really agree with is the fact that the political side of that has to be involved. We need the counties involved. We need direction from our governor.
Yep.
We need participation so that we can make it a management plan that works for the wolves and, more importantly, works for everybody that's here.
All right. Today, for roll call, we are fortunate or unfortunate. I consider it unfortunate that we have one name, but we still have a name. Army Staff Sergeant Patrick H. Quinn died October 13th, 2013, serving during Operation Enduring Freedom. He was 26 years old of Quarryville, Pennsylvania, assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 10th Special Forces out of Fort Carson, Colorado. He died in Patika Province, Afghanistan, of injuries caused by small arms fire. One too many, but it is one for the weak.
Rattle and troll, shake, rattle and troll. Yeah, kiss the weapon off, grab the sticker on me, and the boys gonna shake, rattle and troll.
It's time for Shake, Rattle, and Troll, a show for the serious fisherman, as well as the novice looking for tips from the pros. Shake, Rattle, and Troll is brought to you by Bill Luke Dodge Chrysler Jeep. Now, here's your host, saltwater fisherman and tournament pro, Don McDowell.
Well, we're back. This is John Colazar, Pete Similero, and Patrick McDowell. The big bass daddy is sitting in Missouri, and he sent us photos of him in full camo, armed and dangerous for those poor turkeys in Missouri, which, according to his estimates, were 6 feet tall, weighed 235 pounds. Oh, I'm sorry, those were the deer he was talking about. No, the turkeys were 45 to 50 pounds. Big, 6 feet tall. At any rate, he'll be back with us next week. Next week, will probably be in the mountains hunting mule deer. So, Pete, we've listened to Mr. Beers. We know we have issues in Arizona. We know the federal government wants to participate and cooperate with the powerful lobbying agency known as Humane Society of the United States, the Center for Biological Diversity, who has trapped Fish and Wildlife numerous times on their own rules and regulations. They are the best chess players for endangered species and equal access to justice. Your thoughts?
Well, what I see before us right now is that we're embroiled in a fight that's going to take years. I mean, this is a fight not just about the wolf, but about land management, land use. and whether or not the people of this state and this country will have the ability to use their public lands and in what form and fashion. Specifically, right now it's the wolf. We know they're lining up behind this with the jaguar issue. We have virtually no jaguars, a handful that can come in and out of this state occasionally from Mexico. It's not a place for jaguars, but that's the next one down the line. So as we look at what's before us, it's clear we need a good plan now for the wolf, because this is going to grow into other things. And for all of us that like to use public lands, like to recreate, spend time out there, want to preserve wildlife, conserve wildlife, utilize the beautiful areas of this state, it's imperative that we be involved in this process. It's imperative that we give direction to our state agencies, work through the counties in order to give input and hopefully affect a reasonable plan, in this case, to manage wolves. And so I would implore everybody to stay informed on this issue. You've got to be involved. You can't turn your back and expect for the right thing to be done. The federal government's too large. It's out of control. It's a situation where we are going to be inundated with things that we really can't live with as stewards of the land if we allow this to continue and not give input. So right now, Game and Fish is developing a wolf management plan, something that all the pieces are going to be hung on, and something that hopefully will give us guidance here in the state. It'll work for the wolf, okay, that's fine, but it'll also work for the people. It'll put limitations on what we can do with the wolves, what they can do, where they can go, how they're going to be managed, the specifics, the pieces that are needed by the local communities that are affected by wolves. I really don't care what Tucson and Phoenix says. The simple fact is it's the outlying counties and the smaller communities where livelihoods, safety, all of the other issues come into play. They need a say in this. So, Johnny, I think everybody needs to be involved in working on this, and we need to try to lead the outdoorsman in a way where we can affect positive wolf management.
From everything that I've seen over the years, we know that the hunting community, while having strong opinions, is not necessarily vested in participation in a political process. And you and I know the one thing that Washington listens to a lot is phone calls. We've heard that in the past. I would implore anybody who has an interest in being a participant in such a tiny degree as to just pick up the phone and dial one phone number at an appointed hour and time where we could make an impact on any legislator that we wanted to, that we could basically say have 1,000 phone calls to Congressman Grijalva's office telling him that we do not want to see any more wolves. Granted, his opinion is totally opposite of ours, but it would be interesting to shut his office down for a day. And I think that's the power that we have is to simply have enough people saying we don't want to be stepped on anymore by an onerous federal government. We, the people who live in these rural counties, and I wish I was one of them, I'm not, but you as a landowner and as a property owner in Eagar, Arizona, have every right to demand from the Apache County Board of Supervisors that your concerns be heard. And I think Apache County's taken the lead in that, but we're seeing the other counties starting to sign up. Mojave County, yes, we know that's going to happen. La Paz County, which surprised me, was immediate and adamant in their response that they weren't going to allow wolves in their area. Have you heard any news on Coconino?
No, Coconino is a real key to a lot of things. As you know, it's a hotbed for environmentalism.
Because of the university.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Berkeley East,
okay. A lot of the wolf advocates are based there, and it's going to be an ongoing fight in Coconino County. I think once the voters are exposed to everything, I think they'll make the right decision. But clearly there'll be a lot of influence to be nothing more than a wolf advocate for those in and around the Grand Canyon, north of the Grand Canyon, etc.
Now, we know, of course, that the financial backing to carry a wolf initiative in Arizona would be buried by the wealthy, Sierra Club, Center for Biological Diversity, and Humane Society of the United States. We know that in other states, the Humane Society is going in and funding ballot initiatives based out of Washington, D.C., where they're trying to selectively one issue at a time, one agenda at a time, in each individual state one at a time. The bear ban that they're trying to do in Maine. I mean, that's where Washington, D.C.'s based Humane Society of the United States is dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into trying to get a ballot initiative where they're outlawing baiting or hounds for bear hunting in Maine. That's the kind of thing that scares me to no end, is that they have the financial clout to paint whatever picture they choose and not have the public at large realize the adverse effects of what they're going to be doing.
Without question, that's one of our biggest obstacles, is the fact that these people are religious in their zeal to exterminate us as a hunter, fishermen.
Yeah, no doubt.
And they will do that. They pick and choose in areas where they can take a particular issue that's a hot topic and expand on it, build on it, and hopefully change things through legislation, regulation, etc. And that's exactly how they operate. Most of the organizations, the active environmental organizations, have a similar model today. They'll either use their money or, better yet, they'll use our money through equal access to justice and sue. In fact, I'll put it this way. They are often in collusion with our federal government behind the scenes and through the courts to achieve just that.
I remember hearing that, and you're going to have to help me along with this, and that is that the final say usually comes from any kind of surveys or administrative policies or even practical policies. If there's a debate, for instance, as to whether these wolves are genetically wolves, that it goes in a court issue, it goes back to the Fish and Wildlife Services, who rely on the environmental groups to give them the facts. You know, like the science-based Ted Turner boys. Those are all bought and paid for scientists. They love wolves. That's their whole life. They don't take any practical applications. They don't encompass any socioeconomic impacts that affect those rural communities. Their only concern is a tunnel-visioned, little spot, myopic view, and that is one animal, the wolf. Doesn't take anything else into consideration.
Well, we always have felt that the court system is the ultimate decider of things that happens in this country. And in this case, it's true, but it's heavily slanted in favor of the Fish and Wildlife Service. What it is, the term is called court deference. And sound science is one thing, but the court can determine that even with sound science on the other side of an issue, that the Fish and Wildlife Service's position is in the best interests of us. So in other words, it isn't the people speaking, but the court is speaking and making this decision, and looks at court deference, finds in favor of the Fish and Wildlife Service. No matter how good the science is showing something else, it still finds in favor. So we're up against that. That's one of the things that the state wildlife agencies and individuals, private organizations, all have to face when they're dealing with this. That's been the history in our courts of basically working with the Fish and Wildlife Service and saying, well, there may be another opinion, but we're going to side with you.
All right, we're going to take a break. I'm John Colazar.
Pete Cimolaro.
Patrick McDowell.
We'll be back.
I see no good reason still.
All right, we're back at it. Well, Pete, we know what we have. We know what we're looking at. And I suspect that we have a deadline of next Friday, this coming Friday. The 25th of October is the final comment period for people. And the 28th is it moved to? Okay, October the 28th. So basically we're looking at next week. We have a rare, unique ability to tell the federal government why we don't want wolves. And I know that I've read hundreds of those comments that people have put in already. We know that the comments are running basically 100 to 1 in support of wolves. But their logic behind them is they're beautiful. I want wolves. I think you should basically keep more wolves. There is no sound science on that. And we're trying to convey to people that based on the historical data that the Fish and Wildlife Services themselves provided when they started this program, that it's not working. We certainly know that the destruction of herds of elk that we have helped to fund through the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and other organizations that we've belonged to have put elk on the ground, and now they're going to go away, and they're gone. I don't think that the Yellowstone herd will recover, and certainly the Lolo herd will not as well. We're going to have minor small groups, bands of elk, but we're not going to have anything that we had in the past. Do you see any recovery efforts that are going to prevent the extinction of elk herds like we saw in the past?
Well, that's a real complicated question, and complicated by, one, all the states that are involved in our elk herds and where the wolves will go, because they're moving into other areas and they will continue to do so. So we're really faced with a dilemma in state by state in how we're going to approach this and how we're going to live with wolves and how we're going to be able to manage wolves. Right now, the northern gray wolf is close to being delisted, which will allow management by the states. In the Midwest and in the West, they should be able to put a program together that gives some control. Although, even though hunting has been allowed the last couple of years, the target goals in these states is not being reached as far as wolves that are taken.
No, the pack sizes are growing.
That's correct.
Even though there's hunting and trapping going on.
So there's got to be something more than just that. It has to be expanded. It has to be a completely integrated plan to control wolves. Otherwise, you're going to continue to see the complete decimation, in some cases, of wolves. Of elk and deer and moose and other species. That's correct. Here we're a little ahead of the curve because we don't have to live through what Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana just went through. For the last couple of decades, they've been fighting this. Now they know what the outcome has been, and in many cases, it's not been positive. We're at a point in time where it's imperative that we have a plan that doesn't allow us to go down that road, that doesn't allow for the continued loss of our big game species in this state. It's important that we now, not later, be involved and develop that plan, that we put pressure on Game and Fish Department, on the counties, on our elected officials to ensure that our whole natural resources are not decimated by one animal. I mean, in this case. So to me, we have an opportunity, and that's what I guess where I'm at right now is we as sportsmen have not stood up when we needed to. We often react to a bad situation like they are doing in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho. We need to help lead this. We need to be active. The sportsmen of the state, and I'm talking even about the fishermen, all of them, because, they don't want any real fish out there if they're not threatening endangered species. They don't want bass. They don't want trout, etc. What we're up against right now is the fact that we are having our natural resources manipulated by zealots who are absolutely trying to change how we use our land, what we have on our land, basically the traditions of hunting and fishing in the state of Arizona.
Would you call it more of an isolationist policy, a preservationist rather than a conservation effort?
Well, it's certainly more of a preservationist, without a doubt. So many of the environmentalists are content to have a good feeling about keeping you and I from doing what we do, and that's being out on the land.
Right.
That, to me, is where they take great pleasure in the fact that we cannot use our land, that we cannot access our land, and that they can dictate policies that will determine the future uses.
Arizona is kind of a unique state because so much of our land is like 83% is public lands. Only 17% is private land. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. But it's so diverse here. We have the largest Indian reservations in the world, and
Correct.
There's millions of acres that are in that group. So it's a situation where while we have a lot of public land, it's really limited, and certainly it's limited in terms of our ability to access it and use it as we used to, as traditionally as we did. Everybody knows what's going on today with the travel management guidelines, the restrictions on camping. Stay within 30 feet of a road. Now, come on.
When your rig is 35 feet long, I'm curious how you can stay within 30 feet of the road.
But this is the world we live in right now.
I know.
mean, it is being cut up, diced, sliced, and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We've watched the fact that just this last week, the government shuts down and you can't have access to the lakes. Come on.
But they had the wherewithal to make sure that somebody went out and put locks on everything. They made sure that Washington, D.C. was patrolled heavily so that none of the monuments could be looked at, barricaded, watched over by civil. While they may not have been federal, they certainly leaned heavily on local municipalities to make sure that nobody could utilize these. That was what I would call a classic payback and make the public hurt as much as possible when they didn't have to do that.
It's the world we live in. And that's it. There's so many goofy things that happen anymore. It's just incredible to me how things have changed. But getting back to where we're at with our natural resource and natural resource management, this is going to continue to plague us in the future. And I don't care what agency you're dealing with, whether it's Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, BLM, Forest Service. All of these issues are going to continue. That's where it's absolutely incumbent that the states, the counties, the political entities within those states, our legislators, stand up, help direct policy, and say, no, we're not going to take it. We are going to be involved, and we're going to make it work for the people of Arizona.
By the way, you saw where they're supposedly going to have meetings in Arizona and New Mexico prior to the end of the comment period. You think it'll happen?
No, I don't. I don't have any faith in that. We've seen that gerrymandered so much, going back and forth the way this is right now. No. First of all, I don't think they want to hear from Arizona, because if you actually hear from the people that are the meetings that we've attended, I mean, it's clear where they're coming from. But they're getting, as you pointed out earlier, these hundreds of thousands of comments. Of course, most of them are outside Arizona.
Of course.
Many of them are outside the country.
Yep.
But that's, again, where the environmental community thrives, because all they have to do is put it out on the website, and they've got comments. That's what these people do. It's very easy to sit down, type it out, and in basically about 30 seconds you can send in a useless, worthless comment.
I would be fascinated if they were ever to be able to do a study of all the businesses that went down based on the wolves in the north. Our northern tier states, when they put them in Yellowstone, they claimed that it was going to be a financial economic boom with all the tourists who would come in to see the wolves. Now, granted, they had people come in to see wolves, but what have they lost?
Well, we clearly know that the outfitting, guiding, pack business has been affected tremendously.
As well as out-of-state licenses that people won't come now. They know, and it doesn't take much. One bad season up there tells you that there are no more elk to shoot. There are no more elk to be involved with. There is nothing to be watching anymore.
We're going to continually see how this plays out up there, and that's another thing we need to watch, because here in Arizona, we don't produce tremendous numbers of wildlife. Our habitat is much more marginal.
Much more delicate.
We have smaller numbers here. You add an alpha predator in any substantial numbers, and you're going to really make a difference in our wildlife in this state. We need to learn from what's up there and what's happened up there before it happens here.
Well, coming back next segment, we're going to have James Guggenhauer from Rim Country. And I am proud to say that Payson stood up and made their thoughts well known to Sherry Barrett, as well as the Fish and Wildlife Service at the meeting we had last month. We'll be back. Oh, Jennifer, I love your choice. Thank you, darling. All right. We're back. Is Mr. Guggenhauer with us?
I am. Good morning, John. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully. We just finished applauding the fact that Payson was able to get over 100 people at the meeting last month regarding the Mexican gray wolf reintroduction into Arizona.
Right. I've been listening to the show online, and I'm happy to say I was one of the 200 people in the Payson area that attended that meeting.
Well, congrats. I knew you were there. I knew you would be. And we just need to make sure that more and more of the population becomes aware of it because, quite frankly, if there's any more releases, they're coming straight down 260 highway, and that right down your backyard.
Right, exactly right. And that's, we keep talking about the small communities that will be affected by the wolves. And Payson, Star Valley, Pine, Strawberry, these are exactly the areas that have the elk herds and the deer herds that are going to be impacted. So, and we have a lot of interest in this resolution up here.
All right, let's do something more fun. Let's talk about fishing.
Great.
What have we got going on this week?
Well, the first news that we announced here in Rim Country that you alluded to earlier was that we finally have access to our campgrounds and our ramps again down at Roosevelt Lake. So it's nice that it's all open, but we did get word right after the shutdown ended that they opened all the gates, and so it's back in business as normal down there. The water level in Roosevelt Lake is more good news. During the summer, they draw the water out of Roosevelt Lake for uses down in the valley, and then in the fall, that kind of slows a little bit, and they transfer to other water sources. So they're not taking as much out of Roosevelt as what they typically do. It stands at 45% full, and it's been there about the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's been fairly consistent right there, 45% full.
It is, yes. And the Salt River is flowing at about 200 cubic feet per second, and the Tonneau is just barely flowing. It's just a trickle.
Yeah.
But that's normal for this time of year. It'll stay like that until we get some heavy rains or snow during the winter. That's when hopefully we'll build the lake up again to higher levels for the spring fishing.
Have you heard any long-range forecasts for what the winter's going to be like, Jim?
Supposed to be wet winter, and our monsoon up here was more normal than what it's been the last 7 or 8 years. I think we had a pretty average monsoon, but that's the first one in several years. And from what I've been hearing, we're supposed to have a pretty wet winter up here, so I'm looking forward to that.
I know the week before my elk hunt, it rained every day along the Rim Country until Thursday when it became bright and clear and dry, and it has stayed that way ever since.
Yes, that's about right. Hey, the bass fishing was called good on Roosevelt this past week. Now, we've been talking about the last couple of weeks about the crappie that are schooling up.
Right.
And getting a little easier to catch. Well, it seems like the bass are starting to school up, too. And, this is the time of year that they begin to do that. So we're telling people we don't want to give up on the topwater bite or the Texas rig or the drop shot that we've been talking about the last month or so. But now's the time to start searching around for a spoon.
Really?
Spoon, yes. Fish, as they school up, and, a spoon flutters down through that school of fish, and it's a really good technique for fishing, especially in the cooler months.
What depth do you do that at?
I've heard as depths as far as 70 feet down.
Oh.
But typically they'll be sitting between 40 and 50.
Wow.
And now we use one bait is called a crippled herring, and the other is called a stratus spoon. And there's 2 techniques that local anglers use. One is to cast it as far as you can, and you can do that pretty easily because they're about a 1 ounce kind of weight.
Oh, yeah, I can send that across half a lake if I got a big enough spool.
That's right. And just let that spoon kind of flutter down through the through the school, and you can pick them up that way. The other way is to vertically jig. A lot of guys will get right over top of a school and literally drop to the bottom, crank up until they're at the right depth, and then they'll jig, where they'll lift their rod up about 3 feet and let the bait flutter back down. A little more action in that type of a bite. So, good time to be on the water, and everything's looking good for the bass. Now, the crappie, as we've been saying, everyone is quite surprised at how good the bite is this fall. Last year, we were talking about this last week to some really experienced crappie guys, and they can't remember a fall where we had such a good bite. The crappie are schooled up. They're in 25 to 35 feet of water, and they will always be in a brush area. But if you can find these different areas, they're They're biting good, and guys are catching the limit. 20 to 25 crappie are being caught, and having a good time. One trick that everybody's using, you got to use an ultralight rod. It's about 5 foot 6 inches, and about a size 4-pound Power Pro line. And for some reason, the yellow color in the Power Pro seems to work best. But that's a good setup for crappie, and guys are being very successful on it.
That's awesome. I'm glad they're finally getting some crappie bites going.
Yeah, after the last couple of years, for sure. And then the last thing that we talked about, John, was the trout stocking program.
It's back in business.
It is back in business. Payson Green Valley got its first stocking, and it's the only one of the urban lakes that got trout this early. Most of the lakes in the valley, it's mid-November or so before they start putting trout into those lakes. But tell all your listeners, come on up here to Payson and fish down the Green Valley, because we got stock trout, and guys are catching them on salmon eggs, power baits, and worms.
By the way, did they happen to place a few of those 5 and above pounders in there?
I didn't hear that on the report from Game and Fish this week, but it's typically they do that. As the season goes on a little bit, they take some of their stock trout that they use for breeding, and they release them as they get a little bit older. And some of those can go up to 4 pounds and even 5 pounds in there. But I didn't hear any in these first couple of stockings, though, John.
It's a lot of fun for kids, and particularly this time of year. I mean, I know it gets down into the 30s now, is it not, at night?
Yes, it is. We're getting right around freezing, and but it gets up to the mid-70s in the afternoon, so it's great.
And how about the color? I mean, I haven't been there in daylight lately, so I'm curious. Are we starting to see some of the turn of the color?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's
spectacular.
I mean, yeah, all the trees that do change color, they have all red leaves and even starting to drop now. So good stuff.
You still hearing any elk bugling?
I am. We heard them just the other night. Bugling here. We even took a drive down the street to see if we could see it down there, but we couldn't.
Couldn't pick up on it.
Locate it. But yeah, they're still here, and fun stuff. I've got some pictures on my trail camera I'll have to bring down to you, because I got one big old bull in the backyard that you and a whole bunch of other hunters would like to get a hold of.
Ooh. You've got my email address, right?
There you go.
Elk Habit. Yeah, just send it down. Just send it down. All right.
Cool.
How are the comments coming now about the potential for a meeting in Arizona regarding this wolf issue? Are you guys still on top of that?
We're still trying. The town of Payson sent 2 different emails to Sherry Barrett, and we have offered to hold that meeting at Payson High School. We've made arrangements with the school to get their auditorium, and we told them you can have the stage, you can have all the electronics and the audio systems that you need to do your presentation. And it was followed up by a representative of the town that sent a following email saying, yes, we would like to do that and help you get the word out on the meeting. Now, I don't know if because of the shutdown, if they're going to extend that past 28th again, or if they're still going to hold that date, but we have not heard anything on that meeting. So hopefully they'll still have it, and hopefully they'll hold it in an area that's relevant to where the wolves are going to be released.
Well, we're really appreciative of the fact that the mayor and everybody else is starting to get involved with this process. And certainly we as the hunting community absolutely love the fact that the fishing community, I saw Clifford there, he was there at that meeting as well. It's an issue for all of us to band together, because that which takes away from us will eventually have you next in line. And I love fishing as much as anybody, but as well as I do that for me, the hunting aspect is something that's really critical in my life. And I think it should be for all of us.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a perfect example. I am not a hunter, but I just absolutely love looking at elk. I mean, I'm one of those guys out driving around in the truck at daylight to try to see an elk still feeding somewhere. And if I don't have that up here, that's going to be an impact to why I moved to rim country.
You mean seeing a little rabid canine's not going to be making you happy?
Yeah, not for very long, that's for sure.
Well, Jim, I appreciate you helping me while Bass Daddy is gone. One quick question. Did they get, for the permits for the tonneau, did they get reimbursed for that time period when people were down, when they were locked up?
Well, we're trying to push that, but it's, I think everybody knows the answer to it. We'll
Keep pushing, Jim. Keep pushing.
We'll continue to submit receipts to anybody who'll take them.
All right, James, thanks. You have a great week and enjoy the beautiful fall country up on the rim.
Thank you, sir.
We'll be back.
Had the big one on.
The mellow music as we're finishing off the show. All right, I have a question. The Susan Hoffman. Patrick, your brother's not here. You can talk.
Okay.
Is she the one who handles his moulet?
No.
Oh.
I don't know.
Who does?
I can't answer that.
You know, but if you release that information, your brother would kill you?
No, he'd punch me in the chest.
Okay. Enough said. I adore Don and his moulet. We have had fun with that in studio in the past. All right. As we're getting ready to close, Pete, thank you for coming down. I appreciate you taking the time. We see the critical nature of what's going to happen. We know that we have counties who could, and Apache has been the lead in doing this. Apache County, certainly La Paz, Mojave, they're starting to get in line. We have the counties who are going to talk to the governor. You have some access to the Natural Resources Advisor for Governor Brewer. Their attitude is?
Well, they're very, very concerned. I mean, legitimately concerned about what impacts this program will have, how large this program could go. They want to see controls. They want to see it work. It can't just be something that turns wolves loose and lets them go wherever. It has to be responsible. It has to be something that the rural communities are going to be able to live with as much as anything. Again, we can't dictate from Phoenix what's going to happen up there. It isn't going to happen. But we have to have a program that accommodates the needs of these people. And if you're going to have a successful program for recovery in any way, shape, or form, it has to start in the local communities.
Well, I think it has to start in Mexico to have a true recovery of the Mexican gray wolf. It has to be based out of Mexico.
Absolutely correct. We've talked about it before with about 90% of the wolf habitat in Mexico. It's ridiculous to believe that you can have a recovery plan that doesn't include that. Arizona, New Mexico will never, ever be the recovery area. We can have a certain number of wolves here, but we cannot recover a population because we simply don't have enough land to do that. There's going to be too much conflict. It just won't work. So we need to have a program that establishes a reasonable number, that establishes controls and allows the communities and the counties to do what they need to do, the game and fish to do what they do, and we can ensure that wolves will be here. But we can't do that if we don't have a plan and we allow wolves to go every direction. Quite frankly, it's going to have, in my opinion, it's going to be a wolf war at that point in time because they're going to be out of control and people are going to react. That's not what we need. No. We need a plan that works, a number that's reasonable, a small number, because we don't have that much habitat here in this state to just turn wolves loose. We don't.
Well, we found also that, obviously wolves have the capacity and the opportunity to move wherever they want, even the 75 that we have. And it's been duly noted that they do not move beyond elk-only country. I mean, quite frankly, they can't survive. I think, personally, I know that a lot of them, when they were in the cages and in the pens, they were fed roadkill elk. There's no question about that. But also, just because of the availability of game and the competing predator base that is out there, once you get off the rim, you're into lion country, you're into heavy coyote country, and quite frankly, without the water base and the food base, we just don't have the wildlife to support another top-line predator being brought in.
Not one as political as the wolf, quite frankly.
No. I have some legitimate concerns about how the public will be misled by the special interests of the envirolitigants who are out there. The Humane Society, the Center for Biological Diversity. I'm sorry, I cannot get by Kieran Suckling. It's just the nom de plume bothers me to no end. But that's just personal with me at this point. We've talked about that for years. What do you think about my claims of hypocrisy from the Center for Biological Diversity for not trying to have grizzly bears reintroduced into California?
Well, let's face it, the state animal's absent. Why don't
I think that's deplorable.
Well, and a state like California, if you're going to do something like that, what better state to try it?
I quite frankly,
coast.
I think it's absolutely perfect. The grizzly bear is a large, smart animal, and they claim all to be smart in California. They know how to direct the rest of the United States, and their attitudes are prevalent about the intellect. And one of the smartest creatures that we know with the best sense of smell is the grizzly bear.
Well, what we've clearly seen is an exodus in California. In fact, all of us know how many Californians are here now trying to change Arizona into a California-like place.
Yeah, little California East.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we'll see the grizzly bear in California. I don't think we'll see the jaguar in Arizona. But I do think we can handle a few wolves, manage them wisely, and ensure that wolves are here as a part of what we do, but are here in a very manageable number.
I think a healthy ecosystem should have room for wolves. I agree with that. The Mexican gray wolf, yes. Should they be on the plateau north of the Colorado River? Absolutely not. They were never documented as being there. I can't see any reason, way, shape, or form for Kim Crumbo to be so adamant about having wolves north of the Grand Canyon. That to me is just simply because it's land that does not have a population base. It does not have a wildlife base. It can't handle it. You put wolves up on the Strip, and within 5 years we would have nothing.
Well, virtually every population of wolves that has been grown, say, in the last 15, 20 years here in the continental United States has been grown because of elk.
Right.
And when you start looking outside of that, into these areas that are a marginal habitat at best, with a very less than marginal food base, like mule deer, you're going to have a problem. But that is not taken into account by the environmentalists. What they want to do is spread their agenda north of the Colorado River into southern Utah and all of the areas there. That's exactly what they're trying to do.
Yeah, the utopia that I know a lot of the purists would like to see is a corridor from Arizona through Canada where there is no human intervention. That it's a long contiguous strip for wildlife corridors, for migration of wildlife, removing basically access. There is no way that we can get back to the beauty of what was the United States prior to 1850. It's just not going to happen. It's an impossibility unless you remove all humans. And we know that that's just not frankly going to happen.
Things have changed, and we can't continually look to the past and right the wrongs of the past. It's impossible. What we can do is manage our current resources wisely, learn from the past, and do a better job for the future. There's no reason to extirpate any species. We can manage wisely, and we can ensure that they are here. But we cannot go back and bring back all of the things that in the past were done wrong, all of the species that were eliminated or moved. We can't do that. It's ridiculous to think that we can, and we can't have an approach that carries us that direction.
All right. As we're finishing up here, let's give a plug to the Desert Bighorn Sheep Society and Pete Similaro's Sheep Hunt. What are you up to?
Well, what can I say? Live to sheep hunt. It's a wonderful thing.
God, I'm glad I don't have that addiction.
Yeah, well, I can understand why. It's expensive, takes a lot of time, but been seeing a lot of the state, looking at a lot of wonderful animals. The time of year now that it's cooled off, it's absolutely perfect. It's a real treat right now for me. In fact, it's rare that I'm even here.
November, December. Is that a threat? You're not coming back, Pete?
Hey, just show me the door.
All right. In terms of the rut, when are they? In December?
Rocky Mountain Bighorn is November, and Desert Bighorn is earlier in the year. They start actually even in July. We see lambs from December through June. So this kind of spread out. But Rockies are about to start rutting.
And that's what you're after.
Hey, when you're out there and you're sitting there and you hear the crash of those horns echoing through the canyons, I can tell you it is an absolute delight. It changes your entire focus.
Having been close enough to bull elk fighting, I am imagining that two rams butting their heads together like that would be just an awesome sound.
You can't take your eyes off it. You want to constantly be around it and see it and hear it. It's a real charm.
Well, Pete, thank you very much for coming in and helping with the show today. Patrick Daddy, appreciate it. And for all the audience, next Sunday, the Big Bass Daddy will be back, and the alternate Bass in the Box will be out in the woods. Hug your kids, hug your bass boat, have a great week.